Snail production and management. This is an introduction to snail production. And in this course, we are going to describe snail, the types of snails, that's the types of breeds of snail, and the characteristics or features of snail, such that when you see a snail, you can tell what type of snail it is. And when you want to choose a snail for your enterprise, you will know what type to choose, which one will do better, which one will earn you more income, which one has better management practices, and which one earns you better returns. There are two major types of snail breeds. One is Achatina, and the second one is Achatina marginata. And this Achatina marginata is also called giant African snail. Now, to the features of each of this type of breed. For the Achatina, the major feature you use to identify this breed of snail is that it has a brown shell. It has a brownish background of a shell, and it has a zigzag that is continuous to the end, which ends at the narrow apex. That means from the broad part of the shell, the zigzag continuous line goes towards and ends at the narrow apex. For this type of snail, that is Achatina, the snail flesh varies from gray to dark gray. And usually the egg matures in 10, it is mature enough to lay eggs as at 10 months old. And it can lay so much up to 300 to 400 eggs in 1 year. Achatina type of breed is a good breed for higher income, and it is very suitable for international market. There is another in the subsequently we are going to have a comparison between Achatina breed of snail and Achatina marginata, that's the giant African snail breed of snail, in a tabular form, such that you can at a glance differentiate between these two major types of snail breeds. Now, the second breed of snail is Achatina marginata, also known as giant African snail. And these are the features of giant African snail. The first one is that flesh of the snail is usually silver brown in color. The apex of the snail is broad, and the snail matures and is edible in 5 months. A major difference between Achatina marginata and Achatina breeds of snail is that one has a narrow apex, while the second one has a broad apex. That's the tip of the shell of one is narrow and the tip of the other one is broad. That is a major way of quickly identifying which breed of snail a particular farmer is breeding. This table shows the difference between Achatina breed of snail and Achatina marginata breed of snail. And we have features like the shell apex, the shell color, the shell markings, the flesh color, the reproduction, the egg per cycle, the egg incubation period, the size at maturity, and the lifespan of these snails as their major feature for you as a farmer to be able to identify which type of snail or which breed of snail you would rather go for than the other one. So the two types of snail are native to West Africa. That is Achatina achatina and Achatina marginata are native to West Africa. For the second feature, that is the shell apex or the shell tip. For Achatina achatina, the shell ends as a narrow, pointy V-shaped end. While for Achatina marginata, that's the giant African snail, the shell ends as a broad, blunt tip. Broad, blunt tip. You can see in the picture previously shown in the previous slides to differentiate between the shell apex of Achatina achatina and the shell apex of Achatina marginata. For the third feature, which is shell color, for Achatina achatina, it has a dark gray background, meaning the shell is dark gray with lighter marking. Achatina at a second look may look purplish. That is, the shell color may look like purple, like a purple background. For Achatina marginata, the shell is brownish yellow, meaning it has a brownish yellow background which is lighter compared to Achatina achatina. Feature number 4, flesh color. The flesh color in Achatina achatina is silver brown, a lighter shade of brown. Whereas the flesh color of Achatina marginata ranges from albino, it could be dark brown, it could be dark gray. So the flesh color in Achatina marginata, that is African giant snail, is darker, aside the one of albino, compared to the flesh color in Achatina achatina. For the reproduction feature of the snail, for Achatina achatina, the snail reproduces between 21 to 24 months of age. Whereas Achatina marginata, the West African breed, reproduces between 9 to 10 months of age. This reproduction in breeds of snail means they lay eggs as at 21 to 24 months or as at 9 to 10 months of maturity. Eggs laid per cycle. For Achatina achatina can lay as much as 20 to 400 clutches of eggs per cycle, whereas Achatina marginata can lay up to between 6 to 20 clutches of eggs per cycle, giving Achatina a better breed for quick reproduction. For the future of egg incubation, Achatina's egg hatches in 31 days, while Achatina marginata, the West African snail, hatches in 40 days. That's 40 days. For the size they reach at maturity, Achatina marginata attains larger size at maturity, while Achatina gains smaller size compared to Akakatina marginata, the West African breed of snail. And this gives Akakatina marginata a better market value due to its larger size. But if you're looking at the rate of reproduction, Akatina produces more per cycle of laying of eggs. Now, to the lifespan feature of this breeds of snail, Akatina can live up to between 5 to 7 years before mortality, whereas Akakatina marginata, the West African giant snail, can live up to 10 years maturity before mortality. This gives Akakatina marginata 3 more years reproducing compared to Akatina. So depending on your enterprise goal, if your enterprise goal is to increase reproduction, that is, you want an enterprise that reproduces fast, you will go for Akatina. But if you want larger larger snail, or better, a longer lifespan, larger snail size attained, you go for Akakatina marginata. So depending on your goal, depending on your enterprise goal, that is what will determine which breed of snail you are going to raise. In this lesson, we have been able to differentiate the types of snail breeds, that is Akatina, and Akakatina marginata. We have been able to identify the features of these breeds of snails, how to identify Akakatina marginata, and how to identify Akatina. And we have successfully been able to compare Akatina to Akakatina marginata to know which one best suits your enterprise goal. Management practices necessary for snail production. These are the practices required of you to ensure proper management of your snail farm. You will be learning just how to handle the snails most suitably to ensure a thriving snail enterprise. Whether you are a startup in snail farming or an enterprise snail farmer, that is, you are an existing snail farmer, stay hooked here because there is something new to learn. I would say snail is one of the easiest production enterprise to run, being that it has minimal management practices to observe compared to other enterprises like poultry, like fishery, piggery, and other enterprises. So to raise and manage snail is quite easy. So some of the management practices to observe in snail production is: make sure that the house, the snail pen, are smooth walls. These smooth walls will allow the snails to be able to crawl smoothly around. You know, that is the means of movement of these snails. So it is essential to have smooth walls in place for easy crawling. There are instances where you do not have housing. If it is concrete or wood or metal, just make sure that the surface is smooth. For instance, when you have a pen from concrete floor, try as much as possible to have smooth flooring. And if it is wood, make sure that the wood is smoothing out to allow for easy crawling of the snails. The second point management practice to ensure is ventilation. It is very important for the snail pen or snail house to be properly ventilated, because there are instances where you have many snails in a limited space. If such is happening, then you should ensure that there is enough ventilation within the snail house. Snail house must be constructed not to allow direct sunlight into the snail pen. Snails, as we know, are nocturnal animals. So direct entrance or direct penetration of sunlight into the snail pen may prevent them from coming out to feed. And the more they feed, the quicker they grow. So you will want to prevent direct penetration of sunlight. And a way to prevent direct penetration of sunlight into the snail house is to plant trees over the snail pen, or to have the snail pen in a shaded area. It could be under a tree, or you could create or have a ladder or a tent, not a ladder now, a tent of twigs and leaves over the snail house as a source of shade. In cases where you cannot have your snail house under a tree, or maybe where you place the snail house is not where you could get a tree to place to keep the snail house, you could keep banana leaves inside the snail house, that is inside your snail pen, to be a form of shade within the house, such that the snails can crawl under the leaves and lay there for cooling effect. The snail house should be kept dark most times of the day, meaning the house should be kept close to as dark as possible to make the snails have the feeling of nighttime. Remember, they are nocturnal beings, they are nocturnal animals, and they are more active. They are very active in the night compared to the day. So you want to have the interior of the snail pen as dark as possible to create that nocturnal effect or appearance. Eggs that are laid in the snail pen must be moved before hatching to avoid stamping of those snails, the baby snails. Ants are a major predator that attack snails. It bites the snails and prevents them from coming out. Prevent the attack of snails in the snail pen. It is important to always keep the snail pen clean to prevent snail from coming there. Also, lubricants can be applied underneath the snail pen to prevent ants crawling over the snail pen. Lubricants prevent lubricant prevent ants from crawling all over the snail pen. Lubricants like engine oil and most oil-based lubricants can be used to prevent ants intruding into the snail pen. Rationing, or knowing the ration of feed to present to the snail, will allow you as the snail keeper to know the quantity of feed they can consume daily, so as not to keep excess feed in the snail pen. When there are excess of feed in the snail pen and the feed are become leftovers, there is the tendency of ants coming to take some of those leftovers, attracting more predators to the pen. So it is important to know the ration to present to the snails daily. If the snail house is an open air cage or an open air concrete floor system, part of the house, the interior of the pen, must be shaded. It could be shaded using wooden trenches, or it could be shaded using banana leaves to create that dark areas where the snails can hide and still be active even when the sun is up during the daytime. Seasonal management of snail. um as we know, there are seasons or times of the year that is dry, the temperature will be high, and the humidity may be low, especially during harmattan. These times At these times, the snail require more close attention. Reason being that snails like snails perform well in high humidity, low temperature, and in good, not too dry season. So that is why at times during the dry season, it is advised that you sprinkle water over the snails to mimic rain, so that the snails can think it is still the raining season with that sprinkle of water. It could be done twice daily, in the morning and in the evening, not when the sun. Don't do it when the sun is high up. Suitable housing and equipment for snail production. In this lesson, you will learn just how the choice of suitable housing can aid the ease of managing your snail enterprise. Housing, if not properly set up, can cause the loss of the snails, which every rational snail farmer wants to avoid. We are going to identify the different types of materials that can be used for housing the snails, their prospects and setbacks. Housing equipment needed within the snail house will be discussed to ensure that you can manage a snail farm profitably. Pay attention and get these new techniques in snail housing. Snail farming has become a very lucrative business in Nigeria. It is one of the most successful and profitable businesses in the country. Snail farming is a good alternative for animal protein production because it helps to reduce hunger in our communities, and it is usually prescribed for individuals with certain ailments. So creating a good market for snail. In this lesson, we are going to learn suitable housing for snail production. Materials that can be used for snail housing include wood, concrete, tires, metal drums, pots, old buckets, old drums. Those are some of the materials that can be used to produce or to raise snails. Here is a picture of a snail pen. As we can see, the snails are raised on a concrete floor where they are given certain wooden materials for shade. We all know that snails are nocturnal animals, whereby they come out in the dark. They feed more at night. They are more active at night. So in the daytime, they are hidden in the trenches. Those are made with wooden materials. In this type of system, the snails can be raised in their numbers. All you need to do is keep the snail pen clean so as to keep away ants from these snails. This slide shows snail housing using old tires. These tires can be cut to create more space within the tire space and arranged or piled on top of one another to create adequate space for the snails. You can have as high or as tall as you want for the snail house. The disadvantage with this type of snail house is that you have to be able to keep the tires in place. It has to be kept in a place that it is not disturbed. Metal drums are good snail housing materials. It can be used to keep snails and it is conducive for the snail. All you need to do is keep the metal drum in a shaded area. It could be under a tree, or you could create a kind of canopy for the metal drum so that the snail house can be kept cool. And a disadvantage with using metal drum is when it starts to rust, it can constitute um, a form of challenge for the snails to crawl on the drum. In this picture, we can see snail housing constructed with a wooden material, and in this case, you construct a rectangle or a housing for the snail with the wood, and inside the wood you lay a nylon material, and on top of this material you lay sand, and this sand you will place the snails so that they will not be able to escape, and as well as to prevent ants from entering into the snail cage. You can see that the upper part of the cage is covered with wire gauze to allow for aeration of the snail space. The lower part shows a snail cage using with four of the sides, or let me say five of the sides, covered with wire netting, where it is only the underneath that is covered with wood. This is to allow for better aeration for the snails as well. Clay pots are good housing materials for snails. Reason being that they can be kept cool, and snails love cool environment. They tend not to come out to feed during its period. So using clay pots for snail housing is a very good housing method. Snail housing equipment. These are equipments that are required in the snail house. And two important equipment needed in a snail house is one, the feeding trough, and the water trough. And the feeding trough, which is a large flat basin where the feed presented to the snails are kept. It is important for this feeding trough to be flat for ease of feeding among the snails. Also, the water trough must be a flat tray to allow the snails to take water easily. Feed and feeding practices necessary for snail production. This means that we are trying to discuss what you can feed your snails, what you can present to your snails to ensure optimal production among your snail in your snail enterprise. it is important to know what to present or what to feed to your snail to ensure that your snail grow well, to ensure that your snail produce at the right time, to ensure that your snail lay eggs and lay eggs to the optimal. So in this lesson we are going to discuss what you can present to your snails for optimal production in your snail enterprise. So the first thing you can feed your snail is plantain leaves. Plantain leaves or banana leaves. As you can see in the picture, it is the green the green leaf you cut from a plantain tree. This this provides two things. One, it feeds your snail, and two, it provides shade in your snail pen. It also keeps your snail pen cool, whereas the snails feed on the plantain leaves. The second thing you can present to your snail is African spinach, and this leaf is vegetable. It is edible to humans, and it is a source of vitamin. It is a source of vitamin. African spinach can be presented to snails to support them optimally. Another thing that can be fed to snails are water leaves. Water leaves can be eaten by humans as well, and it is this succulent vegetable that can be presented to snail for optimal production. Just as I mentioned earlier about plantain leaves, banana leaves can be presented to snails, and they can be used to shade the pen to create that nocturnal effect, that dark effect within the pen, even as the snail feed on them. Pawpaw leaves are good um, feed that you can offer to snails to support their growth. Pawpaw leaves. Tender flowers. Flowers can be presented to your snails as well, and they are going to feed on it and gain nutrients from flowers. So you can give your snails tender flowers to feed on. Cocoyam leaves. Cocoyam leaves are good feeding materials for your snails. If you have access to cocoyam leaves, it is very good to present cocoyam leaves to your snails. Fruits like pineapple can be given to your snails. Mind you, when you should take caution while presenting fruits to your snails, because they usually attract insect, ants into your snail pen. So when you feed fruits or overripened fruits to your snails, you should monitor properly so that you can pack excess or leftovers on time to prevent ants from taking over your snail house. Sliced pawpaw. It is very important I should mention that when you are presenting fruits to your snails, it should be sliced. It should not be given to them as a whole, as a bulk. Once it is sliced, it makes it easy for them to be able to munch or to eat the fruit very well. Egg plant, that is garden egg. It can be presented to your snails. When you are presenting garden egg to your snail, you should try and slice it to make it easy for your snails to feed on them. Tomato fruits can be presented to your snails. Just make sure that you slice them and present it to the snails. Banana fruits are good feeding materials for your snails, so make sure you present. Banana fruits are a good source of potassium for your snails, so it is a good idea to present banana fruit to your snails. Sliced mango fruits. Mango fruit is a very good feeding materials, especially when mango is in season. You realize that you have mangoes, you can lay your hands on mangoes at cheap
prices, or even wild mangoes for people that live in areas where they can fetch wild mangoes from the bush, and you can feed to your snails. So mangoes can be very good feeding materials for your snails. Lettuce, this is a green vegetable that you can feed to your snails. So yes, you can feed lettuce to your snails. The next one is cucumber. When you are feeding cucumber to your snail, make sure that make sure that the cucumber is properly sliced so that it is easy for the snails to feed on them. Orange slices, yes, you can feed orange to your snail. Just make sure that it is sliced. It is a good source of vitamin C to your snails, so you can feed orange to your snails. um other feed materials you can present to your snails are leftover foods from the household, like cooked rice, cooked beans, pap, porridge. Yes, you can present them. The only thing you need to avoid is salt. Do not present food, household leftover food that contains salt to your snails. Do not present salt in any form to your snails. Um, Decomposing plants and decomposing fruits can as well be fed to your snails. For instance, you have some bananas in the house and you could not take them anymore because you feel they are bad, they are decomposed. You can give them to the snail. You can feed them to the snails, as well as decomposing plants, maybe vegetable in the house that you're no longer using in the household. You can put them in the snail house, they will feed on them. One very important note to take is green pawpaw fruit. Green pawpaw fruit is a very special feeding material for snails. Reason being that it's aiding growth and production rates of the snails. So if you have access to green pawpaw fruit, just slice it and present it to your snail, because it will help hasten their growth and also their rate of production. Milled corn or milled guinea corn can as well be presented to your snails. The only thing is, when you are presenting it, you must have milled it. If it is corn, if it is guinea corn, if it is millet, any form of grain that you want to present to your snail, you must mill it to powder form. And when you are presenting it to your snail in powder form, you must make sure that you mix it with water, make it into a paste before you present it in the feeding trough for your snail. It is a very good source of feed to your snail. It is a very good feeding material for your snail. When you present cornmeal or guinea corn meal to your snail, they can be combined as a snail mash. This snail mash will contain dietary requirement for snail. You know, it is very important for snails to take calcium and all the dietary nutrients. So when you're combining when you're making snail mash, it can be combined with other nutrients to make sure that the mash is sufficient in nutrient for the snail. Powdered egg can be powdered eggshell can be presented to the snails to supplement for calcium. That is to supply calcium to the snails, because calcium deficient snails will have their shells turning whitish. That is, once your snail's shells are turning whitish, then you should know that your snails are deficient of calcium. And this deficiency in calcium occurs most times in snails that are domesticated. So once you start to see whitish snail's shell, then you should know that your snails are lacking calcium. And a good way of giving calcium to your snails is to make eggs shell into powder form, then you put it in their feeding trough. They are going to take it, feed on the calcium. So far we have mentioned that snails have a broad range of feed. You can give them leaves, you can give them fruits, you can make their mash, you can give them calcium in form of powdered eggshell. And snails feeding is very important, because once you don't feed your snails effectively, they will not grow, and as well will not produce as at when they are supposed to reproduce, or they will not produce optimally. So it is very important to produce to feed or present adequate feed to your snail, to ensure that your snails are producing and doing well optimally. Cautions to take when feeding the snails. In this lesson, we are going to discuss what precautions or precautions to take when feeding your snails. These are the things that you need to take note of, so that you not perform, or so that you things you need to avoid doing to ensure that your snails do properly and produce optimally. So the first caution you need to take when feeding your snail is: feed your snails once per day. Most suitably, snails should be offered their feed at night, because they are nocturnal animals and they come out at night to feed. So if you feed your snails during the night, it makes it easy for them to feed, and once they feed more, they grow more and they can reproduce at when due. So feed your snails once per day, and present the once per day feed to them at night. The second caution to take is: leaves and fruits must be cut into tiny pieces before they are offered to the snails. Ensure that all your feed in leaves form, in fruits, are cut into tiny bits for easy eating by the snails. The third caution here is: every milled grain, maybe you milled corn, maybe you milled guinea corn, and you want to present it to your to your snails, ensure that all chaffs are made wet. Ensure that all milled corn, all milled millet, all milled guinea corn are made wet before they are presented to the snail. The fourth caution is: snails must be arranged around the feeding trough. Once you have offered the feed to the snails, ensure that you place the snails around the feeding trough. They will go there and feed. When you are presenting calcium meals to your snails in the form of bone meal, eggshell meal, they must be made into powder form. Make sure you make your eggshell and your bone meal into powder before you present it to your snails. It is very, very crucial. The sixth point is: do not mix calcium diet with any feed. Whenever you are feeding calcium to your snail, make sure that you present the calcium meal alone to your snail. If it is bone meal, if it is eggshell meal, present them alone. Do not mix with corn meal, do not mix with calcium, do not mix with millet meal or sorghum meal. No, present your calcium meal alone to your snails. Another caution is: you must ensure that all your feeding troughs are in flat containers. All feeding troughs must be in flat containers. Present all your feed in flat feeding troughs. Potato leaves are a no. Never present potato leaves to your snails. Do not present potato leaves to your snails. It prevents your snails from laying, and it limits their laying capacity drastically. So do not present potato leaves to your snails. When you present ripe pawpaw fruits like pawpaw, pineapple, orange, it usually attracts ants, which pose threats to the snail. So to prevent ants from coming And when ants sting your snails, they prevent your snails from coming out to feed. So try as much as possible to minimize the invasion of ants into your snail pen. All fuels that are offered to the snail must be salt and chemical free. Do not present any feed or feeding material to your snails that contains salt or that contains any other form of chemicals. They will harm your snails. Food that are leftovers from the household or food that are left for the leftovers in the snail pen must be removed before serving a fresh one. This is to prevent this is to prevent ant invasion into the snail pen. This lesson is a section of a complete snail production lesson. So check out the other lessons under snail production if you are intending to set up a profitable snail production enterprise. Fifteen reasons why you should invest in snail production. Number one reason is the enterprise requires little capital to set up. Snail enterprise requires very little capital to set the enterprise up. Most of the times, agricultural enterprises are capital intensive, but for snail production, little capital is required to set up snail enterprise. The second point is you can invest in snail enterprise because it does not require much professional knowledge for proper management. A little knowledge about snail production can help you manage your snail production enterprise to bring about optimal snail output. The third reason why you should invest in snail enterprise is snail itself is free of diseases. And once you maintain good management practices, you realize that snail require no serious attention to treat any form of disease. It doesn't require any vaccination program neither as compared to poultry production. So snail is free of diseases, makes it easy to manage and a better production enterprise. The fourth reason why you should invest in snail production is that snail enterprise requires less labor to manage. Less labor in the sense that feeding is done once in a day, giving them water can be done once in a day, and cleaning the snail pen does not require much labor to clean the snail pen. So snail enterprise require less labor to manage. The fifth reason why you should invest in snail production is it is a noiseless venture. So even if you are in a urban area, you can as well raise snails. Snail can be a good venture for you to go into because it is a noiseless venture. The sixth point here is snail production does not constitute nuisance for a smelly environment. Reason being that it can be contained and it does not pollute the environment. Seventh point where you should go into snail production is snails have low mortality rate and they have very high fecundity. Fecundity in the sense that it has high rate of production, high rate of reproduction, and low mortality. So if you combine these two traits in snail production, you realize that you have very high return on investment in your snail production. The eighth reason why you need to invest in snail production is that snail feed on roughages and fruits. They also eat leftover food from the home, and these roughages and fruits are as they are available round the season can be fed to the snails, and it will support snail production. So you don't have to be looking for feed, or you don't have to invest so high in feed like in poultry, where it is a must for you to give your poultry birds feed. In the case of snails, you can source your feed from grasses, from roughages, from plant leaves, and from other roughages, leaves, and fruits to support your snail production. The ninth reason why it is easier to raise snail is that it is a good source of income even at international market. So snails can be a high source of income for you, and as because it is widely acceptable, and it is as in local as well as in international market. The 10th reason why you need to invest in snail production is the blue liquid. The blue liquid, that is the slippery or slimy liquid that the snail produce, is used in a number of enterprises, like in skincare, and as well as to produce um, medication for skincare and for other things. So you can produce snail to produce those blue liquid, which is very highly um, income generating. The 11th reason why you should go into snail production is that snail meat is very rich in protein and iron. Snail meat is very rich in protein and iron. This makes it widely acceptable, and it does not have any form of fat. So it makes snail widely acceptable as a source of protein for a number of people. The 12th reason why you should invest in snail production is snail can survive even under adverse environmental condition. All you need to do is to make the snail pen conducive, so that even if the temperatures are high, you can provide water to cool down the snail pen, you can provide leaves to cover the snail pen, and you must ensure proper management. This will help the snails to adjust even in adverse environmental condition. Then the 13th point where you should invest in snail production is snail is highly of medicinal value, and it is used in treatment of hypertension, diabetes, very highly recommended for people with this ailment, and it will help them to overcome their ailments. So snail is highly highly acceptable for people that have ailments like hypertension, like diabetes. The snail are usually found in high class menus, in cuisines, and in world class menus. You can find it is highly acceptable as a valuable source of protein in international markets, in cuisines, and on menus, in restaurants, in high class occasions. You'll find snail in the menu. And the last one here is snails can be kept in different places, in trench, in boxes, in snail pen or snail house, just as your income capacity is, and makes it widely widely easy for even small scale farmers to be able to venture into snail production. Likewise, commercial farmers can also venture into snail production in a large scale. And so far, we've been able to cover the advantages of snail production and what we can benefit going into snail production. Please and please, it is very important for us to hear from you. So leave a comment down below and let us hear about this course, what you perceive of this course. It will help us to provide better courses in the future.